You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. I can do those things because I'm not a hero. I'm whatever Gotham needs me to be.
They'll hunt you.
You'll hunt me. You'll condemn me. Set the dogs on me. Because that's what needs to happen. Because sometimes the truth isn't good enough. Sometimes people deserve more. Sometimes people deserve to have their faith rewarded.
To the chat and the instructors on the panel. Os.
Os. Os.
We've talked about this topic a lot. I'm very frustrated when I hear a lot of the same narratives that's animated by the spirit of black men having some sort of ownership to not just black community, but what we've identified as the gynocracy. I'm also frustrated at the fact that after all this time we've talked about the gynocracy, people still don't understand what it is, and they think that you're attacking women as an aggregate and black women in particular, which is fundamentally not only intellectually dishonest, intellectually lazy. It is completely gaslighting the effects that intersectional feminism has had on our cultural dynamic. And it compounds and gets worse. Because take a look at the last few videos BGS has put out, speaking about the baby farming dynamic that went on in the early 1800s and led up to its ultimate dissolution, essentially, because the cotton gin made that redundant. We don't understand that the damage that that institution caused wasn't in the physical work. It wasn't even in the moral undertones of what it takes to do that. We are in probably the exact same position that people will be facing in the next 20, 30 years when genetic engineering gets popular, of being a synthetically created people, including a culture that was fostered in that environment. And if we don't understand that there is social damage that's done, that at this point may be irreparable, this is the consequence of what we're talking about right now. There is absolutely no way you can look at the current situation right now in aggregate. And I'm going to emphasize this again, in aggregate, because I'm sick and tired of looking at people look at a general statement and they collapse it to an anecdote every single time. Maybe they don't mean to do this. That needs to stop. Maybe this is a result of maybe the Prussian school system right now, public education, not teaching people to look in generalities, or generalities being demonized from some perspective so that it reveals some insecurity about being left behind. That's probably a very deep dynamic that goes all the way back. Understand, when we speak in generalities, it is animated by the spirit of problem solving. Collapsing it to an anecdote is worthless in that scenario. There is an exception to everything. When you look at the end result of the behavior that we see right now in aggregate, it is playing out a subconscious behavior that has been programmed on that plantation. When you're telling me that you have a cultural precedence of people getting freedom economically, physically, by having children and submitting them to the plantation owner or the banking institution that has a capital loan out for that person, you can't tell me that doesn't follow you down the line, especially with what we know about epigenetics, how these behaviors literally can be baked into your genetic code. And even if you don't behave that way as an individual, you can pass that behavioral dynamic to your children. This is the exact same scenario we see. When you've got a situation where, because women by default on this plantation can get to areas that men couldn't get to, such as the big house, what's the difference between that and what went down in the Jim Crow era? When on the plantation, all we were considered slaves. We were the same social and class, right? Same clothes, same status, right? Everybody's a slave. But who could get emancipated off the strength of having kids? Now let's flip that. What was happening to the men? Getting castrated if they didn't meet a certain physical dynamic. Being highlighted for the physical work they can produce. And having a select group of individuals called bucks and mandingos that got to procreate and were forced to procreate. You cannot tell me this behavior is not playing out in any project you look at right now. Even if you move out of that project, that was literally an environment where that literally got bolstered and multiplied. People recreate what it is they have from where they came from. And when I hear these educated, I'm digressing slightly, but when I hear the educated lane versus the individuals, Ray and all of them, and the select and non-select argument, I see that same crap happening on the plantation between men who got to have kids and procreate and those who literally got, their nuts clipped off. There's some that wouldn't even be allowed to breed if they didn't reach a certain height. If you don't think this behavior is following people from the plantation and playing itself out, something is wrong. Because marriage is literally something that is instituted and supported by the culture. Without it, all you're talking about is people getting together for a relationship. It's supposed to be for the consolidation of power. And the last thing I'll say with regards to that, family, the last time I can see, and I've said this before on this show, the only time I can see in modern history where black men had a legitimate patriarchy was immediately after emancipation. We're talking 1860 when black men could join the Union Army. And the only reason why that was important and such a critical nuance is because women were not allowed in the military. And the state offered a brand new cultural paradigm where men were de facto leaders supported by the state. And everyone's talking about Tulsa, Oklahoma right now. Understand, it was that legacy, that cultural seed and generation for the next 20 years that had us at our greatest height economically, legally, and politically. And we were beating the brakes off of everybody we were adjacent to. And this was in the height of the Industrial Revolution. And it took the rising of the 3K camp to show up armed with weapons and a philosophy and an ideology to literally burn and destroy and shoot it down, leading us to the reset point we had with Jim Crow. We have been literally trying to play catch up ever since. I know everybody wants to go in and try to collapse just the anecdotes of work hard, and if you multiply by zero hard enough, maybe you'll win the lottery. We're the only damn group of people in this country that have to constantly reset from zero and constantly build back up from scratch. And then everybody wants to hold these traditional values that you get from an intact culture and community, like we can just manifest that from the ether. And what's crazy is some of us are still making that work. Some of you know somebody that's doing it. Some members on the panel right now have done it. But you can't compare that to what's going on in the aggregate. When again, the spirit of problem solving is addressing the environment so that you can get a different result for the aggregate. If you can understand how that works with marketing, you can understand how that works with social behavior. What we're looking at are consequences of that. There's no difference. None. Right now, we are where we're at right now because the environment has made it to where family is an option for certain people. And as COVID has shown, the moment that stops becoming an option, everybody changes their tone. And it's going to get worse now. It's just that a matter of question of, are we going to get into a scenario where this UBI is going to be so preferential towards women that they can gain some sort of coast and buy advantage? Or is it going to be bad enough for everybody to where we finally understand we're on deadly ground and we begin to aggregate our power, and you do what's necessary, which is begin to raise families by starting with your boys and posture them so that they can go out and compete with other groups of men. Because if we don't start doing that now, when this fourth industrial wave shows up and we got people talking about going to Mars and getting resources from the celestial bodies, so to speak, or in the more immediate pressing scenario, when they start farming and mining Antarctica, it's going to be a wrap. And we're going to be having the same conversation about what it means to even be human in the first place, let alone this word black.